Well, of course, I'm Bryan Smith. I live in Legislative District 32. I've been there 28 years. That's where I've raised my five children. They're all now out of the house in different parts of the country. Um, I've been practicing law in Idaho Falls longer than that, maybe 30 years plus. Um, I, um, I've been married to my wife for 40 years, Sharon. She's very supportive of my run for the state legislature. Um, and so I'm actually running, Brian, because the voters in Legislative District 32, frankly, weren't given a good choice with the two options that they had. And so I'm running to also to repeal the grocery sales tax. I fought that issue a few years ago with Governor Otter and went to the Supreme Court. You're probably familiar with what happened there. What had actually happened is the legislature had passed grocery sales tax repeal,
Oh, yes.
Butch Otter's desk, and he vetoed that on the 11th day. And I could actually read the Constitution for the state and knew he had to do that within 10 days. So we filed a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court said I was right, that he vetoed it one day late, but then they gave him a mulligan and said, just don't do this in the future. I can't imagine some criminal defendant whose constitutional rights had been violated, and the Supreme Court will say, sorry, you're going to be put to death, but we'll make sure this doesn't happen in the future. That still bothers me that Idaho is only one of 8 states that taxes groceries. It's an immoral tax, and I'd like to go to the legislature the best I could to repeal that. I'm also running because I believe in real school choice. I want parents and students to be empowered. That's why I want the money to follow the children, and the parents get to decide where it goes. And then I also believe that we need to, when I say protect our borders, Idaho cannot force the federal government into building the wall, the border between the southern border. But what we can do is make Idaho very unattractive for people who come to into our country illegally. There should be no sanctuary cities, no free health care, no free education. I believe it was last year, one of the senators actually even tried to pass a bill, get a law enacted that people who are here illegally could get driver's licenses. We need to make sure those kinds of things aren't attracting. They're not a magnet for people to come here. And then we also, I believe Trump's going to win the election. We need to have legislators in Boise who will stand tall with him and enact pro-Trump legislation. And so, for those reasons, I got into the race, and I'm really glad I did.
So, there's a lot to unpack there. Starting first, I guess, you're no stranger to politics. Ran for U.S. Congress. Currently serve as the national committee man for the Idaho Republican Party. So you've been here. You've seen how things are done. You've seen what the problems are, and uh, what's the unique issues that you think that your district faces? District 32, you've got out in Bonneville County. I've got the map up on my other screen so I can be familiar. Not Idaho Falls, but you've got the surrounding areas, National Laboratory. What are some of the unique things that the legislature can do for your constituents, and what are you hearing from them as to what they're concerned about?
It's I'm going to tell you what I'm hearing from the constituents, the people in Legislative District 32. It's not really that much different from what you hear in other places in the state. Groceries are up 40%. Food is up 40% from what it was just 4 years ago. This is absolutely killing people. I've had people tell me that they would like the grocery sales tax repealed because it would make the difference in 2 car payments for them a year. And so we have this Biden high inflationary economy, and it's really hurting people with their food bills. And so everybody in the district. Now, of course, we have the INEL. We have farmers because we have a lot of agricultural land. But everybody in the district is getting hammered with food prices, and it's actually it's a compound problem because as food goes up, you not only pay the increased price of the food, but now you get to pay a 6% bonus to the government, and it really is hurting people. And so when I talk to people, I mean, I go door knocking and meeting with people, and that issue resonates with people on both sides of the aisle. Even when we got grocery sales tax passed before Governor Otter vetoed that, it was the Democrats and the conservatives who worked together to get that done. And it was actually, it was a Republican, Butch Otter, who undid it. That issue is one that I hear about on the doors. I talk to people. I've gotten your stuff in the mail. I like that idea about repealing the grocery sales tax. And so, and I don't think that's unique to just to this district, but I hear that a lot from people. And the high inflation is really hurting people. That also is an issue that's not unique. Oh, sorry. Forgot about that. That's not an issue that's unique to Idaho, to Bonneville County. And so those are, and those issues affect everything. I mean, the high inflation that we're seeing currently under the Biden regime, that affects the price of diesel, which affects the price of running your tractor, which affects the price of food. So really, it's what we see happening in this legislative district is not unusual compared to other districts.
So coming back to the grocery tax, the argument I've heard from people who are opposed to its repeal is that, one, people are already getting a tax credit in the mail, or, well, direct deposit, however, at tax time. And also, if you repeal it, then the grocery stores will just raise their prices by 6% anyway. How do you respond to that?
Well, that was actually Scott Bedke who came up with that last argument. He apparently doesn't have the first clue how free market systems work. Because as soon as one guy raises it 6%, the other guy says, well, I can undercut that and take the business. So for somebody to say that they have no understanding of how free market systems work. So they're not going to just raise their prices by 6%. And if they try doing that, then their competitor is going to lower their prices and you're going to find equilibrium in the market. So I don't buy that for a second. As for I think the other thing you mentioned was the tax rebate. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, so that's $140 a year. I figured it out. I think it's if you spend more than, I can't remember what that number was, $240 a month in food for an individual, then you're losing on that deal. In other words, it comes out to, what is that, $140? That's like $10 a month. It's like $12 a month or something. It only takes you like $230. And suddenly, as soon as you spend more than that, I don't know, I think the average person spends more than $230 on food a month, especially now that food prices, I just saw a chart this morning, they're up 40 to 45% of what they were just a few years ago. And so that is a bogus argument as well. There's only 8 states in the country that tax food. There's only one state in the country that has this gimmick. Oh, we'll just rebate some of your money and make you feel like you're getting your money back. Well, if that's such a great deal, then maybe we should give the government all of our money and then they can rebate back what we need. It's totally ridiculous. No other state does it. But let me tell you what does happen. On border towns like Fruitland, you can't have a grocery store in Fruitland, because people drive across the border and they go take their business into Ontario, so they don't have to pay grocery sales tax. There are people driving from Caldwell all the way over to Ontario. They'll go there once a month, drop $1,000 for groceries and save $60. So it's very hard to have a grocery store in a border town in Idaho. Let me tell you what else is happening. People who are on food stamps or the EBT cards, those people do not pay sales tax on their food. Hope everybody hears that. The taxpayers are paying it, but people on government welfare, they're not paying sales tax. So what happens is this, they're not supposed to, but they check the box on the tax return and they're getting the credit. So here are the taxpayers paying it twice, right? And it's a ridiculous system that we would let the government take our money and spend it and then give us back our money at the end of a year. We ought to repeal the grocery sales tax, close down that entire department, let people keep their money. They'll end up better off for it. And there's just no question about that. I've also heard the argument that we have people from out of state coming in and they pay they're paying the entire amount of the grocery sales tax. That is absolutely ridiculous. It's false. We've run the numbers on that. That's not happening either. What you have is people who love to tax and spend people's money. They love the grocery sales tax because people have to eat. That is an immoral tax when we're taxing something that somebody has to do. You have to drink water, you have to eat. These are the same people who would tax your air if they could figure out a way to do it. And so I am resolutely opposed to the grocery sales tax.
So beyond repealing the grocery tax, what else can the legislature do to ease the burden of inflation?
Okay. One of the things we can do is Idaho has, and I don't have the numbers, I had them, I don't want to misquote them, but Idaho has one of the, especially with respect to our neighboring states, we have a higher corporate tax rate. I still think that our income tax rate is too high. I still think that our property tax rates are too high. And this is all a reflection of how much money our government is spending. Our state government 9 years ago was spending just a little shy of $7 billion. Now we're at $14 billion. The more money the government spends, the more money it ends up getting either from the federal government that it has to print, or it extracts from the taxpayers, and that becomes a less efficient system for spending money. I trust people way more than I trust government bureaucrats or people who print money. So what we need to do is reduce our tax rates overall if we could, and that's going to require us to cut some spending. And those things would help, but an immediate 6% repeal of grocery sales tax, people would feel that the day that law got passed.
Shifting gears to school choice, you also mentioned that as one of the primary issues you're looking at. A bunch of other states have enacted programs to allow money to follow the student, but we've had some trouble here in Idaho. The education savings account last year died on the Senate floor. And this year there was a tax credit for private school tuition and other expenses that it failed to even get out of committee. And I believe the incumbent in this race was, sponsor of that one. How do we, what's the best system? What's the best thing that we can do? And then how do we get it through the legislature?
Okay, so my son lives in Florida, and he was telling me about how excited he is for the system they have there. They get an $8,000 amount, and it follows each child. And so he says, Dad, if those guys in the public school system or the government school system start teaching my kids diversity, equity, and inclusion, or anything that I oppose, I can take my child and put him in a private school. And that money follows the child. Or I can take my child and put them in, I can homeschool them. And if we need to hire tutors or additional cost to do that, we can use the $8,000 for that. That, in my opinion, is the best system because now it empowers parents. Right now we had to make the decisions. And I trust parents far more than I trust bureaucrats. Right now, our government school system is broken. If you look at the test scores from Idaho, I don't have them exactly memorized, but it seems to me that they were the reading and math. One of them was 32% proficiency and one was 37% proficiency. That's what you get when you have a monopolistic system run by one entity controlled by teachers' unions. That's what you get. And the only way to break that, the only way to get better results is to give people choices. We do it all the time. There's antitrust lawsuits all the time. Google's got them. Other companies are always looking at them, facing them head on. That's exactly what we have in the education system. And so if we can empower parents to make the choices on where their children go. Now, look, we also have another issue in Idaho. We have a constitutional provision, our state constitution, that requires a uniform, publicly funded common education. I'm in favor of that, and we have a constitutional obligation to have government schools and have them funded. That does not preclude government money from following students into private schools or also into homeschooling. And that's the only way. When parents have the ability to remove their children or move them to a different school, then and only then will the schools listen to what parents want to say. Otherwise, it's just a monopoly, and their attitude is going to be like, well, what are you going to do about it? You can't go anywhere else. Well, yeah, I guess supposedly, a parent could pay his taxes And then if he has any discretionary income left after he's paying the taxes we pay today with property tax, income tax, corporate tax, grocery sales tax, then he's got to pay again. No, I think we need to do what Florida's done. That will truly empower the parents. Now, you ask, how do you get that through the legislature? We need better legislators. Right now, if you look at the people who are killing school choice, these are by and large self-proclaimed Republicans who are teaming up with Democrats who are basically friends of the teachers union to stop it. So until we get better legislators, we're going to have a problem getting it through. But I think that parents and I think the population at large is catching on. They don't like diversity, equity, and inclusion. They don't like drag queen hour for their kids. They don't like some of the pornography that's being, any of the pornography that's being allowed in schools. But when you have a Republican opposing pornography in school libraries, it's time to get a real conservative. If we put real conservatives over there, we can make Idaho, to coin a phrase, great. But that's what we need. We need better legislators, ones who aren't afraid to speak out against the teachers union, ones that aren't afraid to speak up for teachers. That would make a big difference.
Well, getting more conservative legislators, that kind of comes to the heart of the divide in the Republican Party right now, especially in Bonneville County, where the PCs and the county committee, they're very hardline conservative, support the platform to the point where they've called legislators to the carpet for not supporting the platform. And yet these legislators were elected by the people. So how do we square that circle? And how do we, is it just that people are not really informed, or is the electorate more moderate than the politically active folks? What's going on there?
Just that is a great question, and I will give you this observation. Unfortunately, in Southeast Idaho, people vote based on who they like instead of the policies that they like. And that comes through friendships, that comes from church gatherings, that comes from neighborhood gatherings. There are certain people that have lived in Idaho, Southeast Idaho for a long time, and they're influenced by their friends and who they like instead of the policies they like. But I believe that when people are informed of what the issues are, that they will make an informed choice. But it's very hard to break through relationships, especially close relationships that people have formed at church or other places in Southeast Idaho. And until that changes, I think we're going to continue to have a problem. But the fact is that the Bonneville County Central Committee, Legislative District 32, Doyle Beck's the chair of that district, they've done a really good job of educating the voters, or at least they've tried to, on what the issues are. But you've identified a great problem. I mean, in Southeast Idaho, if you look at our legislators over here, they don't vote much differently than Democrats. I mean, take a look at Wendy Horman. Her spending index score is a 2.8 out of a possible 100. Now, there is not a single Republican in the state that's lower. Every Democrat in the House is at least 3 times better than that. That's abysmal. That's horrific in my view. Yet there are people. I mean, I've been knocking doors. I'll knock on a door and I'll talk to somebody and they'll say, "Oh, she's my neighbor," or "She lives across the street or around the corner." And I'll say to them, "Do you know what her voting record is?" "Oh, it doesn't really matter. I know her, and that's all that's important to me." Until we start voting on principle, and we just vote on who we like in relationships, we're going to continue to have this problem that you just identified.
You mentioned the spending index, and that's obviously a huge issue as well, where everybody, every Republican in Idaho says they're a fiscal conservative. They want to reduce spending, cut the size and scope of government. But then, a lot of people go in there and just increase it.
So what does that mean? That means they're not telling the truth, right? Isn't that what that means?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out because, I feel like we have a lot of folks in the Republican Party who are very, hardline. The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. That's it. Let's get rid of everything else. But then we look at what government's actually been doing for the last 100 years, And they've got their fingers in everything, and they spend money, throw money around everywhere. They take federal money and throw it everywhere. Where do we even begin to cut that back? Every single line item and every single budget has someone who will get up on the floor and say, "No, we can't cut this one. This one's important."
And I was actually thinking about this morning because Wendy, and I like Wendy. I mean, I know her, I like her, she's a nice person. I just don't like the way she votes on spending. Last year, she opposed the launch program, and that was appropriate. The launch program is a horrible program. It transfers the obligation of a private enterprise to train employees onto taxpayers, is what it does. It was bad last year and it's bad this year. And this year, though, she voted to fund it for, I think, 100 million or whatever the number was. And so the question is how does this happen? Why does this, if it was bad last year, why would you vote to fund it this year? Well, the launch program is a really good example. It's a 5-year, and they've even called it an experiment. 5 years from now, I was thinking, here's what's going to happen. 5 years from now, they're going to say, okay, how did the experiment perform? And the proponents of the launch will bring in 3 or 4 people, maybe a dozen people, show up to a committee, and they'll say, without the launch program, I never could have gotten my certification to Rodeo Clown College, where I could then be a rodeo clown, and that's really helped me. That's what they're going to do, right? We need leadership. We need statesmen. We need people to say, look, I appreciate that, sir, but you could have gone to Rodeo Clown College anyway. If you would have done like I did and gotten a job as a high school senior, worked 14 weeks and saved the money. So, this is a real problem because they use, the lowest common denominator, so to speak. They'll bring them in and they'll say, well, we can't get rid of the launch program or Johnny won't go to Rodeo Clown College again. It's a real problem, and we need fiscal conservatives, real fiscal conservatives, to say, no, wait a second. In order for us to fund the launch program, there are people on fixed incomes, widows, single moms, paying taxes. We have to take that money from them. Who's going to speak up for these people? But you're exactly right. Government continues to grow. Every Republican claims that he's a fiscal conservative, and then they vote for the EBT cards to give food stamps to children during the summer. And it's a real problem. But one of the ways to stop it is we need to have outspoken conservatives in the legislature who aren't afraid to say, look, that is not the rule of government, to take from those who have and pick winners and losers. But if you don't have somebody who's willing to push against that hard, then it just it will happen. It's like the second law of thermodynamics, the law of entropy. If you don't push back on something, it's going to go to disorder, and that's what we see happening in our government.
Well, you mentioned the income that she opposed launch, but then supported funding it. I've heard from a lot of people who are chairs and vice chairs of committees about how they might oppose something in committee, but then once it gets to the floor, they feel duty-bound, honor-bound. I don't know, maybe there's even an unspoken rule about it that they have to then support it on the floor. Is that a reasonable excuse, or would you like to see things done differently just as part of the workflow of the legislature?
So who do they represent, the committee or their constituents, right? If you represent your constituents, you will oppose bad spending on the floor, even if it got passed in JFAC. That's what you'll do. Now, if you're part of the good old boy network, then you're going to abandon your principles, and you'll say, okay, well, since JFAC supported it and it passed JFAC, I feel like I've got to support the committee. That's a real problem to me. That is not a reasonable excuse. In fact, my grandkids, I saw some of this last weekend, and they used the word lame. That is lame. It passed JFAC, so I have to support it. Well, you don't represent the committee, you represent your constituents. If it's bad policy, it's bad policy, and that's what you should do. But here's what I heard Wendy Horman last week. I was at on Thursday, I participated in a candidate forum, and she said she feels that if the government if the state passes a program or a statute like launch, she defended her vote in supporting launch by saying once it got passed and became an operable program in the state, she felt an obligation to fund it. That's also lame. That's a horrible excuse. I mean, can you imagine if for some reason, let's just pick buggy whips. Let's suppose the state of Idaho subsidized buggy whips 100 years ago. Well, even though they're not necessary, we don't need them. They never should have been subsidized to begin with. Yeah, but we had a program, so let's make our annual tribute payment to the buggy whip industry. That's terrible. We shouldn't be doing that. If it's bad policy, we should be opposing it, and launch is really bad policy.
That actually brings up an interesting dichotomy with how various representatives see their role. Um, my state senator is Senator Grow is the other co-chair of JFAC, and he said the same thing that once the legislature decides something, then it's not JFAC's job to try and undo it or create loopholes or go around it. It's their job to make sure it gets funded as the legislature said. But that doesn't seem to always be the case. This year, there was the whole controversy over the Idaho Transportation Department and their budget, and they were going to sell their former headquarters, and JFAC made kind of an executive decision to say, no, you're not. So, how much should the Finance and Appropriations committees be involved in policy?
Well, I mean, yeah, you make a really good point. It just depends on whose ox is getting gored, right, in a particular time. As kind of a little sidetrack here, Sean Coletti, who's also in this race, says, I don't want the money to follow the children to school because there's no accountability what parents do with the money. Well, okay, I disagree with you on that, but how much of accountability do we have with the school district? These guys are getting 32 for reading scores, 37 for math scores. Where's the accountability there? So they raise arguments that work in one way, and then when you apply them in a different way, though, they want to ignore them. And that's the same thing with JFAC. They're still elected representatives. If it's bad policy, it's bad policy. And the example I gave Wendy Horman at the last candidate forum is I said, what if you're a brand new legislator, you come in and you're on JFAC, and the legislators before you had passed a law that we're going to give money to Planned Parenthood to help perform abortions. Is it not duty bound on JFAC to say we're not funding that? Because that violates our sense of propriety, that violates the platform, that violates morality. We're not doing it. Or do you say, oh, I guess we'll just give in to the abortionists. We'll go ahead and fund it because my predecessors did it a few years ago. They came up with the program. To me, that makes no sense. It is not their job just to fund whatever the government comes up with. And in fact, I will just tell you that Wendy did a good job. She came up, and so did Scott Grow, coming up with the baseline budgeting, and then the other portion of it where you could look at it. Now of course that hasn't made any difference with her because she's voted for everything that's come her way. But that tells me that JFAC does have a conscience. Hey, there's certain things we don't want to fund. We could be opposed to it in JFAC. So they're kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth, and they say, look, beyond the baseline stuff, we may reject your budget. Okay, well, if you're going to reject the budget beyond baseline, why can't you reject part of it for the baseline if JFAC disapproves of it? And so I think it's a cop out to say, oh, well, once everybody votes for really bad policy, my hands are tied. I need to help fund it and perpetuate it into perpetuity. I don't believe that.
When you're elected, would you want to serve on JFAC, or do you feel that there are other committees that you could, would be a better use of your experience?
Okay, so I am a candidate. I don't care if I even, if whatever they want to put me on, whatever committee, I don't have any ambitions to be on a committee. I don't have any ambitions to be a committee chair. I'm not going to, like I've seen others do, agree to vote for somebody for speaker because then you can get a chairmanship or a chair. None of that is relevant to me. I am there to represent the constituents, to be the voice of Legislative District 32. I'm not going to be held hostage or extorted for a chair position or for a committee assignment. They can put me wherever they want to. I'll do the best I can to serve, but I have zero expectations when it comes to a committee assignment. It means nothing really to me.
Circling back around to the other issue that you mentioned is an important one, and that's border enforcement, immigration enforcement. Obviously, there were two memorials that went through the legislature this year. One originated in the House. It called Idaho's ag industry to task for wanting cheap labor and demanded that Congress impeach the president for failing to enforce the border. That one didn't pass, but the one that did came from the perspective that says the ag industry needs more foreign workers, so we need to streamline the immigration process and create more visas and such. And right during the middle of that debate, the McClure Center came out with a report that said there are at least 35,000 illegal aliens working in Idaho. And then the dairymen's lobbyist said that there's at least 70% of their workers on the dairies were not necessarily illegal, but would probably fail their audits of their paperwork that they're supposed to have to say they're legal. So all that put together, out in a lot of the legislators from Eastern Idaho argued vehemently against any enforcement of the border or closing the border or deporting illegal aliens because they said it'll impact the agricultural industry and the hospitality industry. It'll make our food prices go up. It'll crash the economy. How do we enforce our laws without doing those things?
Yeah, so that's a complex question, but part of the problem is that my mother, when she was 8 years old, was in Caldwell, and her parents were German immigrants who picked fruit in Caldwell. And that's where she met Paul Revere and the Raiders, because his parents were immigrants, and they were all there. And my mother and Paul Revere would play in the orchards. Okay, you don't find people willing to do that today. And look, it's also the case that they won't do it. There are many people. Now, there's some that would, some that will. But the reason that they won't is because they don't have to. I mean, if you can get a launch money for your kid to go to school, you don't need to go out and work hard. If you can get EBT money, food stamps, and you've got 5 kids, that saves you from having to work. So part of our problem is that we have incentivized people to become codependent on state and federal money, so that they lose their incentive to go out and do some of these jobs. And it's kind of like, it kind of reminds me of the child who kills his parents and then says, "Take pity on me because I'm an orphan," right? Part of this problem is of our own making, is what it is. It doesn't surprise me that Stephanie Mickelson was, I think, one of those who opposed the one resolution. She said, "This will kill agriculture." Well, she's a farmer, right? And so she's looking out for her own interest. But the truth is that if you're here illegally, and that's another argument I hear against the grocery sales tax, it's the only tax that people here illegally pay. Well, the answer isn't to impose a tax on everybody in Idaho so people here illegally can pay their fair share. The answer is to deport them and send them home. If we have workers in Idaho or jobs that we cannot fill, there are guest visas, and the federal government's got that program all screwed up. They make it almost impossible for it to work. But there are ways. A lot of those people that come here don't want to stay here permanently. They want to come and work, make money, and go home. They don't even want to live here permanently. But does it surprise anybody that the federal government can't even administer the guest worker visa program very well? And so we've kind of created this problem on our own. And now we don't want to get rid of it because they think it'll cause bigger problems. But the truth is, if you're in Idaho illegally, you need to be deported. That's what needs to happen. And in terms of agriculture or other jobs, if we cannot get, let's say, American citizens to do that work, then I don't have a problem with a guest workers visa program, depending on what it is. But we don't. But the federal government's not even doing a good job managing that. And everybody who knows about the program says it's cumbersome, it's unwieldy, it's difficult. None of that should be the case. But in the meantime, if you are in Idaho illegally, you need to be deported. That's what needs to happen. That's the law. That's the law we live under. And then society can then feel the consequences of that and then make decisions accordingly. That's how I see it.
Well, the time is flying. I've appreciated you taking the time out of your day. Is there any other issues that we didn't cover that you think are important? And after that, just closing thoughts.
Yeah, Idaho, I have said for a long time that so goes Idaho, so goes the nation. And unfortunately, Idaho is headed in the wrong direction in many respects. We're spending a lot of money that we don't have. 43 cents of every dollar that we spend comes from the federal government, and anybody who thinks that can continue forever it doesn't understand basic math. And so we need to put our own house in financial order, but we also need to change our priorities. The launch program, for example, bad priority. EBT cards for children, bad priority. Spending money to the University of Washington, the WWAMI program. I mean, and these are all things that Wendy Horman's funded, and that's why I'm pointing them out. There's more things that we do. That WWAMI program, they appropriated $7 million to a school that, the med school has the largest fetus selling business in the United States. They do aborted fetus research. They have their interns go to Planned Parenthood. They teach diversity, equity, inclusion to their doctors so they can go perpetrate it on the people that they then practice medicine on. Idaho should not be involved in these kinds of programs. So it's not just a spending issue. There's also other moral issues, other conservative issues that violate our platform that Republicans just they just brush them off and they, well, it's what it is. It's been our plan forever, so we're just going to keep doing it. So I think those need to change. And unless we change Idaho, we need real conservatives to step up, people who aren't afraid to call it as it is, people who are more concerned about their constituents than they are about a committee. If we can do that, we can help Idaho become what I believe it is at the hearts of the people. It can be very conservative, and we can be an example. Why in the world are we looking to Florida to come up with the program for school choice? Why aren't we doing that? We could be doing that. And we also fund programs that don't make any sense to me. Like, I oppose Medicaid expansion. I took a case to the Supreme Court. We lost, but we tried. Well, okay, but a lot of that Medicaid is optional. We don't need to be giving dental care to people that don't work. They're able-bodied. We don't have to be doing that. Yep, that's what we do. And so we need to take a look. I think we ought to look at every program, every regulation periodically to determine whether it's actually accomplishing its intended purpose and whether it's worth taking money from those who earn it to give it to those who don't have it. I'd also like to close by saying this. I am in this race. I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, Sean Coletti is what I call a Joe Biden Republican. I mean, anybody that's looked into his record knows that. He wasn't even registered as a Republican until 2 days before the filing deadline. He wants ranked choice voting. He wants to abolish parties. He doesn't like the Republican Party, but he's using it so he can try to get elected to inflict his brand of policy on the constituents of Legislative District 32. I call Wendy Horman, she's kind of a Mitt Romney Republican because, like, take launch, for example. She opposed it before she supported it and flip-flopped on it, and she's become a big spender in many respects. And I view myself as a Donald Trump Republican. I believe in the Make America First agenda, and I would like to see the district send a America First candidate, America First person to Boise to represent them on, because Trump's going to need some help. He's going to win the election. He's going to get the nomination. He's going to win the election. And he's going to need all the help he can from the various states to support his policies. And I'm the only Trump delegate of the two candidates. I was a Trump delegate in 2020, and I'll be voting for him in July this summer. It's been my credentials as a Republican have been called into question lately. I've been called all kinds of things. I am the national committee man for the Republican Party. There's only one of those persons in each state. So there's no question I'm a bona fide Republican, and I follow the platform, I adhere to the platform, and I will do that as the representative of Legislative District 32, and I'd be happy to do that. And for those people that get a chance to vote, I'd ask for your vote on May 21st.
Bryan Smith, candidate for House of Representatives, District 32, Seat B. Thank you.
All right, thank you.